Well, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I too would wish to extend my huge debt of thanks to IISS for the invitation, for Bahrain for the extraordinarily warm welcome, so typical of this wonderful nation. It's great to be back in the region. I am, of course, from the Royal Navy, so I'm a Brit, but I am here as NATO's Deputy Supreme Allied Commander, so I bring with me that welcome from our alliance, but also an indicator of how much we value the relationship that we have with this region and how much our defence and security issues overlap in so many ways. Now, maritime security is a regional and global responsibility. That notion of shared responsibility links directly to the shared nation, the shared nature of the oceans. They are the original enabler of globalization and of a globalized economy, and they remain the bearer of more than 90% of the world's trade and almost 100% of the world's data. These statistics are often trotted out. They've become almost cliched. You've heard them before. But it is worth just dwelling on them because they really matter. They really matter. And as a result, so does maritime security. We should not be surprised that the freedoms that we enjoy on the high seas also bring with them many challenges as well as the opportunities. And of course, the high seas, being the open oceans, are all linked by choke points that we have heard about previously on the panel. But here in the Middle East, of course, the Mediterranean links with this region through the Suez Canal and then the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and then, of course, the Strait of Hormuz. These very narrow choke points can be very dangerous and they create their own individual. So what's the approach? What is the approach to the maritime security dilemma that is a dilemma as old as the oceans themselves? Well, the first thing is we need to understand the threat. And I think, in fairness, we're pretty good at this. Piracy, slavery, migrant smuggling, and human trafficking, they're both very different, of course. Migration of various types. Drugs, arms smuggling, cyber risks, particularly in and around navigation systems, but also port infrastructures, armed robbery, sabotage, sanctions breaking of various sorts, threats to critical undersea infrastructure, illegal fishing, pollution, terrorism, state-on-state conflict. It's a hell of a list, right? It's a hell of a list. But it has not been overly challenging in keeping pace, at least with the list. Most of those things are centuries old. Some of them are new. And I have lived with the vast majority of those over my 41-year career. But what we do about them, what do we do about them? That, of course, is another thing. Well, the first thing, and I'm sure we would all agree, is to build a strong political consensus around the rule-based international order. And there are plenty of mechanisms, long-existing mechanisms, coalitions, alliances, the United Nations as the bedrock, as it should be, but also NATO, the European Union, and, of course, CSIPA, that is homed here with the US and, most recently, the UK. And I could add to that the Arab League and the GCC itself. All of these structures exist partly or in whole to underline and reinforce the importance of the rule-based international order, but it does require compliance. Frameworks are one thing, but if people are prepared not to comply, either at the state level or the non-state level, then of course we have a problem, and that problem is very existent in all the forms that I've already outlined. Finding the threat requires a slightly different approach, and this is where the military become very active. You have to go and look for it, and to look for it, you need to be cued onto it, because finding ships is not as easy as you may think, if it's a ship you're after, of course. If every warship in existence in the world right now were at sea, individually, spaced equally from each other, they would be about 500 miles apart. That's the scale of... That's a ChatGPT stat, by the way, so you can apply your own measure to the likelihood of that being... But I kid you not, the vastness of the oceans and sometimes the responsibilities placed on the militaries to be able to search them really sits in tension. We really cannot be everywhere, so we do need some help. And it's in our ability to use satellites, it's in our ability to be able to use aircraft, it's in our ability to be able to work with each other that we can start to build a picture. And there are plenty of frameworks and organisations that help in that. Interpol, Europol, Frontex as an example, plenty of United Nations activity in that, bilateral agreements, intelligence sharing arrangements and various agencies. They all bring with them opportunities. But as we have already heard, you can have all of that. But if those frameworks are not populated with the information that we need, then they basically add up to very little. And that requires nations, institutions to be ready to share information with each other. And of course, this is very much a case of risk versus reward. People don't necessarily like to give away information for fear that it is going to be misused. And I really acknowledge that. We see it in the military intelligence world all the time. However, I can say confidently in the military intelligence world that generally we have misplaced the threshold. We could probably take a bit more risk in order to achieve better outcomes. And maybe a good example of that was in the build-up to the Ukraine war, where we saw a lot of intelligence being shared very openly and very quickly in ways that we hadn't perhaps hitherto seen, that at least gave us a good idea of what was happening and indeed when it was going to happen. Now, one of the new challenges, and we've heard a bit about this already, is in the undersea cables and pipeline world. Not the traditional world that we normally think of when we think of maritime situational awareness, but now one that has been propelled into the spotlight. Who owns them? Who is going to tell you where they are? There's about 1.5 million kilometres of these things all over the world. A lot of them are plotted accurately, not all of them are. And if you can find out who actually does own them, and they'll tell you where they are, because there's so much of them, you can't be everywhere along that system of cables and pipelines. So you need to say, right, so where are you vulnerable? You ask a commercial operator where they are vulnerable, they're unlikely to tell you. They don't want to admit a vulnerability. And if you, as I have done, offer a large supplier of petroleum products in the UK a frigate to sit alongside its oil platform, they say, absolutely not. We do not want to see a frigate anywhere near our oil platform for fear that it looks as if we're under threat, because our share price will go down. So we are facing a really different set of challenges, I'm afraid. And it gets even harder when you think about how you've got to stop the threat and try and get on board. The legal frameworks we have to be able to board ships on the high seas are really, really weak. In ports, it's easy. In territorial waters, it's easier. But on the high seas, it becomes not impossible, but very, very difficult. We typically rely on the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea, Article 110, which allows us to jump on board a ship in the middle of anywhere if we suspect it of piracy. So that was very helpful in this region at the beginning of the 2010s. Piracy was one of those legitimate reasons to jump on board. Slavery is illegal broadcasting is a third. And if you think a ship isn't flying the flag it should be flying or is flying no flag at all, you can get on board to verify its nationality. But that's basically it. Beyond that, if you want to jump on board a ship on the high seas, you need the permission of the flag state, or, and often it's and, a UNSCR to enable it. Neither of those are easy to come by. So when we start thinking about things like the shadow fleet and trying to really get to grips with it, we in the military are often called upon to jump on board. It's really hard, far harder than you would think. And if you do get on board, as the Finns did with the Eagle S that it brought the crew to trial on recently in Finland, it's a really risky prosecution, as the Finns found out, because they were unsuccessful. And the crew of that vessel that was suspected of raking up cables and pipelines in the Baltic ultimately were released. And to add insult to injury, the Finnish state picked up the court costs that were over $200,000. Now, recently, the French have taken a vessel. There'll be another trial, and we'll see how well we get on with that. So these trending issues are tricky. And I'll wind up just by saying there are some practical things we can do. Of course there are. We need to enhance the inclusivity and purposefulness of our dialogue. Now, I'm here for the very first time as the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. I mean, I'm the first ever DSACUR to come here. I was joined yesterday by the chair of the military committee, the most senior serving military officer in the alliance, and our special representative to the southern neighbourhood. As I said at the beginning, and as I will reiterate, we really know this place is important, and the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, of which Bahrain is a member, of course, is just one of the ways. There are many others that we demonstrate that. We must invest in capability and technology to make our maritime situational awareness more effective, to protect our cyber networks, our own cyber networks and information systems, in a way that at the moment we are not doing as well as we could. And that information must be shared, and that requires nations that like each other and sometimes nations that don't like each other to actually be prepared to do it. And although the rules-based international order is under threat, we must not lower the bar. We have to maintain the standards that we hold. So, Your Excellencies, the sea connects us, it should not divide us, it carries commerce, energy and, of course, a bit of risk. But with that comes opportunity. This forum is part of that opportunity, and together we must ensure that we use it as just one way of continuing to promote the importance of getting maritime security right. Thank you very much.
Admiral, thank you so much for these remarks. I was particularly struck by your point about information sharing. Information needs to be shared. That requires cooperation. It requires a degree of institutionalization of relationships between nations and others, and your argument that we could afford to take a bit more risk in how we approach this to craft efficient and effective responses to the threat that in its many facets, as you said, is a long list, but perhaps not an entirely surprising list. So let us get into that. And I have a number of people who are already on the list seeking the floor, so I'll see that I get as many as possible in, and then we'll return to the panel for responses. And the first one is Paimana Assad from the UK. Paimana.
Thank you so much. My question is to the Admiral. The Houthis continue to target commercial and strategic shipping in the Red Sea. How does NATO view its role in supporting regional partners to protect maritime trade and ensure freedom of navigation while respecting the primary security responsibility of coastal states, considering the 5 joint naval and airstrikes against the Houthis conducted by the United States and the UK to protect trade in the Red Sea? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Oman and the Young Leaders Group, Hailana Al-Busaidi.
Good evening, everyone. I have one question for the panel. How does the CMF, which is a combined force of 47 nations commanded by the U.S. Navy, maintain its efforts in blocking the weaponizations of the Houthis?